Why are you touching the plates? Staff only. The voice was sharp, cold, echoing through the golden chandeliers of the mansion. She froze, hands trembling over dishes she hadn't touched by choice. Eyes darted toward her, guests in silk gowns, men in tailored suits, all watching as if she didn't belong. Heat flushed her face, humiliation burning deeper than the stares. Not one person spoke up. Not one voice defended her. But what no one knew was that this wasn't just another worker. Her presence would flip the night upside down. Comment your city below. Where are you watching from? The mansion stood like a jewel against the evening sky, its marble walls glowing beneath crystal chandeliers that spilled light across the wide ballroom. Music drifted through the air, laughter rang out in bursts, and the clinking of glasses echoed with a rhythm of wealth and power. To the guests, it was just another night of indulgence, another chance to show off gowns, tailored suits, and the effortless pride that came with privilege. But behind the polished silver trays and glittering crystal goblets, another story was unfolding unseen by most and unnoticed by all. Her name was Amara, a woman who had spent her life working harder than anyone should ever have to, her spirit carrying the weight of struggles generations deep. By day she was resilient, graceful, and steady, someone who believed in the dignity of work no matter the task. But in the eyes of those at the party, she was invisible. Tonight, she had been handed a pair of gloves and directed to the kitchen sink, her role reduced to scrubbing dishes while others paraded around the mansion in luxury. The irony, though unseen, was sharp. Amara had walked these very halls many times before, not as a servant, but as someone who belonged here in ways the guests could never imagine. Yet, in that moment, with soap bubbles clinging to her hands and stacks of plates piled high, she bore the weight of being misjudged, her identity reduced to a stereotype in the eyes of strangers. She kept her head down, silent, her thoughts wandering between duty and dignity, never letting the storm inside show on her face. What the guests could not see was the life she carried beyond that sink. She was a woman of quiet strength, a wife who shared dreams with a man whose name carried more weight than the titles of all the people now mocking her. Their love was not built on extravagance or appearances, but on resilience, on standing tall in the face of a world that often measured people by the shade of their skin rather than the depth of their worth. Still, as the night stretched on, whispers began to rise. She felt the eyes on her, sharp, dismissive glances thrown her way from across the polished counters. To them, she was just the help. Just another black woman in a pressed uniform, hands deep in dirty dishwater while they basked in privilege. The sting wasn't in the work itself. Amara had never been ashamed of work. It was in the cruelty of assumption, in the smug laughter that echoed when they believed no one else was listening. Yet beneath the hum of the chandelier, tension was already forming like cracks in marble. The very walls that surrounded her carried secrets that none of the guests could have guessed. What appeared to be just another night of excess was about to become a story they would never forget. And for Amara, the night that began in silence would end in revelation. The laughter grew louder as the night deepened, echoing through the mansion's endless corridors. Champagne flowed, music swelled, and voices rose with a pride that bordered on arrogance. Yet in the kitchen, where the lights were dimmer and the air heavier, Amara stood at the sink, her back aching, her hands red from the endless stream of dishes. She could hear every note of the orchestra, every burst of laughter from the ballroom, but to her it all felt like a cruel reminder. Joy on one side of the wall, silence and humiliation on the other. At first, it was only glances. Guests, passing by the kitchen doorway, pausing just long enough to smirk or raise an eyebrow, as if the sight of her confirmed their place above her. A woman in a sequined gown whispered something to her friend, their eyes darting toward Amara before dissolving into laughter. It was the kind of laughter that wasn't meant to be heard, but cut deeper because of its secrecy. Amara said nothing. She had grown used to looks like that. But tonight, in this house, the sting felt sharper. The whispers soon turned into words. As a young couple brushed past, the man muttered just loud enough, These people are made for this kind of work." His companion chuckled, shaking her head as though the cruelty was common knowledge. Amara's hands trembled for a moment in the soapy water, but she quickly steadied herself. She had promised long ago that no insult would shatter her dignity. Still, the weight pressed down harder with each passing moment. By the time dessert was served, the ballroom was alive with chatter. Guests leaned back in velvet chairs, nibbling at golden plates, their voices louder and looser with drink. That was when the cruelty escalated. A group of men gathered near the kitchen door, peering in at Amara as if she were part of the evening's entertainment. One of them, his voice dripping with arrogance, said, "Imagine living in a place like this and still ending up scrubbing dishes." The others roared with laughter, glances shooting back at her like arrows. She wanted to disappear into the walls, but her body betrayed her. A single tear slid down her cheek, hidden quickly by the steam of the sink, but the wound it left inside was far harder to conceal. These were not strangers on the street. They were standing in her own home, mocking her without ever realizing the truth. The humiliation did not end there. A woman in pearls stumbled into the kitchen, glass in hand, and without hesitation set it down on the counter beside Amara. "Here," she said sharply. "Make yourself useful." The glass left a wet ring on the marble, but the words burned hotter than any stain. Amara clenched her jaw, forcing her hands to keep moving. She had never been ashamed of work, but the deliberate disrespect cut to the bone. Her mind raced with memories of her late father-in-law, who had built this mansion with years of perseverance, of the nights she and her husband had walked these halls, dreaming of filling them with love and family. And yet here she stood, treated as an intruder in a life that was hers by right. The cruelty spread like fire. A cluster of guests near the door began whispering, their eyes fixed on her. "You'd think with all the parties they throw, they'd hire someone better," one sneered. Another added, "Cheap labor is all the same." The words landed like blows, stripping away layers of her humanity, reducing her to something less than the person she was. And still, the night stretched on. Every dish washed seemed to echo with another insult. Every glass polished became a mirror reflecting back the disdain of those around her. Yet within her chest, anger simmered alongside the humiliation. She kept silent, but the silence was not weakness. It was fuel, waiting for the moment to ignite. Then came the cruelest act of all. A young man, barely in his 20s, strode into the kitchen with the swagger of someone born into privilege. He looked Amara up and down before smirking. "Funny," he said. "You'd think someone who looks like you wouldn't even be allowed in a place like this unless it's through the back door." The words struck like a slap, the final push that made her grip the counter just to steady herself. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the very back door he spoke of was one she had chosen to walk through out of humility, not necessity. This house, this mansion, these very walls, they belonged to her family. Yet here she was, treated as though she had no worth beyond the dishes in her hands. The air in the room felt heavier, the cruelty relentless, but something within Amara shifted. The pain was still there, the sting undeniable, but beneath it was a quiet fire, burning hotter with every insult, every mocking glance. They thought they had defined her, reduced her, broken her spirit. But the night was far from over. And when the truth revealed itself, the same mouths that mocked her would fall silent. The same eyes that looked down on her would widen in disbelief. The cracks in the night had begun to show, and soon the walls of arrogance would crumble. The ballroom roared with laughter, louder now, careless and cruel. For hours, Amara had endured the whispers, the smirks, the degrading remarks that chipped at her humanity. But the night was about to reach its breaking point. A hush fell over the crowd as the host of the evening, a man with a booming voice and pride dripping from every word, raised his glass for a toast. "This," he declared, "is what true success looks like. A life where people know their place." His words echoed through the gilded hall, followed by approving laughter. Then, with a smirk, he motioned toward the kitchen door, where Amara was still visible, hands dripping with soap and water. "Some are born to shine here," he continued, And others, well, they were born to serve. The crowd erupted. Applause, laughter, mocking nods. The humiliation cut deeper than ever. Dozens of eyes turned toward Amara, their gazes burning her like fire. She felt her chest tighten, her breath growing shallow, her dignity hanging by a thread. For a moment, the world seemed to spin, the chandelier's glow blurring into a haze. She froze. Her hands, trembling, released the dish she was holding, and it crashed against the sink, shattering in two. The sound rang out louder than the laughter, silencing the room for a heartbeat. Every face turned fully toward her now, not with empathy, but with disdain. Whispers hissed through the air. How dare she break something? Can't even do her job right. And then came the final blow. A woman in diamonds, drunk on arrogance, raised her voice for all to hear. What a disgrace. Imagine letting people like her even step foot inside this mansion. The words struck like knives, piercing not just Amara's heart, but the legacy of every struggle she had carried. Tears burned her eyes, but behind them, fire raged hotter than ever before. This was more than humiliation. It was erasure. They weren't just mocking her work. They were mocking her existence, her right to stand in the very house that bore her family's name. The silence that followed was thick with cruelty. Everyone waited for her to retreat, to shrink back into the shadows, to remain what they believed her to be, powerless. But Amara didn't move. Not this time. Something inside her had shifted. The humiliation no longer weighed her down. It lifted her, sharpened her resolve, and hardened her silence into defiance. The storm was no longer inside her. It was about to break open, and when it did, every mocking laugh in that room would be silenced forever. The night had reached its peak. The truth was ready to surface, and when it did, the world inside that mansion would never look the same again. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. The silence in the ballroom grew heavy, but it did not last. From the grand staircase, footsteps echoed, firm, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Amara's husband entered, his presence commanding in a way no one could dismiss. Gasps rippled through the crowd as recognition struck. He was the true owner of the mansion, the man whose name carried power far beyond the walls they stood in. Without raising his voice, his very appearance told the truth. This was their home. The woman they had mocked, humiliated, and treated as less than human was not a servant, but the mistress of the mansion. The very foundation of their arrogance cracked in that moment, collapsing beneath the weight of reality. Shame swept across the faces that had been twisted with laughter only minutes before. Some lowered their eyes, others flushed red, but none could erase what they had done. The words they had spoken hung in the air, irreversible, undeniable. Their cruelty had been laid bare, exposed under the harsh light of truth. Amara did not lash out. She didn't need to. Her silence, her dignity, her very presence standing tall in the house that belonged to her family spoke louder than any accusation. The same people who had mocked her were now trapped in their own reflection, forced to confront the ugliness of their prejudice. And yet, the pain of the night could not be erased. For Amara, the scars of humiliation remained, not because she was weak, but because she had been made to carry the weight of injustice that should never have existed. She had endured what countless others endure daily, the sting of being reduced, dismissed, and disrespected because of the color of their skin. This was more than a single story at a party. It was a mirror of the world outside those walls, a world where racism hides behind laughter, behind whispers, behind the casual cruelty of those who believe themselves superior, a world where dignity is stolen piece by piece, often in silence. But that night also carried a truth. No amount of prejudice can erase worth, no cruelty can strip away identity, and no arrogance can hide forever from justice. So the question remains, not just for Amara's story, but for all of us. How many more nights must pass with whispered cruelty, mocking laughter, and silent pain before we finally say, enough? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories that the world needs to hear.